Grey County. The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Hi, and welcome to Politically Speaking Election Edition. I'm David Shearman, your host of Politically Speaking. And we've been talking with candidates from all the parties, but today we're going to switch it up a little bit. It's my pleasure to welcome Rejean Grenier, who is Regional Media Advisor for Ontario for Elections Canada. And we're going to have a conversation about all the elections stuff that, well, we kind of take for granted sometimes, but it's critical to how we run and have our elections in this country. Rejean, welcome. Good to have you here with us today.
Nice to be here, David.
Now, Rejean, I noticed, I was reading, it was the Hill Times, and I noticed in a very interesting article about the Elections Canada, believe it or not, that this is the 100th anniversary of neutrally run elections in Canada. It's a centennial I hadn't realized.
That's right. And as it has changed over the years, obviously, from the politicians in the back of a train, which we called whistle stops, if you remember well in the old days, or if you've read about it, you're way too young. But it's now, much more complicated. First of all, there's a lot of people in Canada now compared to 100 years ago. There's a lot more writings, and there's a lot more issues. And therefore, Elections Canada obviously isn't involved in the political aspect of an election. We don't do that. We are here to run an election, to run it fairly and safely. And for 100 years, we've been able to do that.
I think it was quite astonishing in reading this article I'll just read you a brief quote because I think it says a lot about how Canadians feel about Elections Canada. It's a survey that was actually done by Environics, and the speaker is Andrew Parkin of Environics. And he says, the survey found that the proportion of Canadians that have a strong degree of trust in elections in this country has more than doubled since 2014. Specifically, the proportion of Canadians with a high level of trust in elections jumped from 21 to 41% between 2014 and 2017, and has now risen further to 47%. He goes on to say, you can be mad at the federal government without losing trust in the institutions that form the democracy. There's definitely this conventional wisdom that things are always getting worse, but on these measures, they're not, which I think is a strong endorsement of Canadians and their belief and their support and understanding of the work of Elections Canada, because that's what we've got to do on the 20th of September.
That's right. And as in any other election, Elections Canada has been planning this one, particularly because it's occurring in different times, as you know, with COVID and also in a minority government. Now, Elections Canada has done elections in a minority situation before, but planning in a COVID situation that in the last 18 months to 2 years has absolutely been a roller coaster, means that a lot of our plans had to be adapted. I won't say month to month, but definitely certain periods to certain periods, because things would change. And so we really concentrated on what is in the Elections Act. The Elections Act says there are a certain number of things that Elections Canada has to do, and there are things that Elections Canada has done over the years that are not in the Elections Act, that are permitted in the Elections Act, but that are like over and above our mandate. And in this particular case, we did not go too much over and above, because we had to really concentrate and often change our ways of doing things because of the pandemic. But I can assure you that in this pandemic, it will be a good election. It will be a safe election. It will be safe for the electors, and it will be safe for our workers.
Well, let's talk a bit about some of those changes. Let's say I'm going to vote on election day, and I go to the polling station where I'm supposed to go according to my voter information card, which we'll talk about, and I walk in the door. What'll be different?
Well, the first thing that'll happen is there's going to be someone at the door that will take your name. And that person is taking your name not for electoral purposes, but for contact tracing purposes as mandated by the health authorities. If something were to happen in that poll where some COVID issue comes around and they need to do contact tracing, they need to know who was there. So we will be writing those names down and we will keep them for 30 days. They will only be divulged to health authorities if they ask. And if nothing has happened in that polling station, obviously, we won't give that away. That 30 days later, that list will be destroyed. But what else will you see? Well, a lot of disinfectant all over. People with masks, all of our workers are going to be wearing masks. Some will even have, these face shields that you see in some people that deal a lot with the public. Some may even be behind these plexiglass separations that, again, we've seen in the last 18 months or whatever. And so it's going to be very safe for people. Now, it's going to be a little different for electors too. Actually, it's going to be the same, but masked. In Ontario, we have a mask mandate mandated by the province and by the health authorities, and Elections Canada obviously will respect that. Therefore, people who come to vote will have to wear a mask unless they have a medical exemption.
Sure. Now I've heard something about things like single-use pencils for ballots. Is that going to be there'll be a lot of leftover pencils after the election then?
There's going to be millions of pencils, and you know what? You can take them home and have a little souvenir after you've voted.
Of course. There you go. Take your pencil home. That's a great way of looking at it. So, other than that, the process of registering to vote, of identifying yourself to vote, and then casting your ballot, all of that will remain the same as we are used to.
Absolutely. And the best way to find out anything about Elections Canada, the only official information about Elections Canada is actually our website, elections.ca. If you go there, one of the first things you see is where will I vote, or something to that effect. And you can put in your postal code and it will tell you your riding. It will tell you where your local Election Canada office is. It will tell you who the candidates are in your riding. And you can always check all of those things out. But before you do that, you may also want to check whether you're registered. Also on elections.ca, there's a section that's called Am I Registered? You click on that. If you're registered, they ask you to write your postal code again and sometimes your address, and it will tell you, yes, you're registered to vote it from that address. And that's very important. And if you haven't moved, or if you haven't, nothing has changed in your circumstances since the last election and you voted in the last election, there's a fair chance you're still on the registry. But it's always good to change it. Now, that registry includes 27 million names of people. And therefore, if you've moved or whatever, if you filed, for example, on the Ontario website where you can change your driver's license and your health card and all that, that automatically comes to us. And we've already changed your address. But it's always good to check and to make sure that you're registered. And the way you're registered is where you will receive that voter information card that you mentioned before. And if you haven't received a voter information card by the 10th of September, there might be a problem, and you may want to check either by phoning your local Election Canada office or by checking on our website whether you're registered.
I should also add that as we're talking, there will be the Elections Canada toll-free number, which will be on the screen. Also, locations of the three Elections Canada offices here in Bruce Grey Owen Sound.
Right.
One in Wyerton, which is at the Propeller Club, one in Durham, which is right at the main corner in Durham, and one here in Owen Sound, which is on 10th Street West, almost at the city limit, but not quite. So a little change in location there from where we're used to, but they're around and very easy to find, and lots of parking. So
it's interesting that you would put that address there, because I don't know if people know that since the beginning of the campaign, they can go there. They could have went there and voted already by using what's called a special ballot. And I actually did it last Saturday. I went and I voted, and I tell you, it's such an easy experience. You don't have to wait in line, and people there are very helpful, and it takes a few minutes and you've done your duty, basically. Now, there's something to be said about a special ballot, though, that people have to remember. A special ballot is a blank ballot. It has no names of candidates on it. And therefore, you have to know who you want to vote for, the name of the candidate, and you obviously have to know how to spell his or her name, and because you're going to have to write it into that blank space. And then it's pretty easy. You put that little ballot that you've received into a small envelope. You seal that envelope. You put that envelope into a bigger envelope. Then you have to sign that envelope. And if you're at the returning office, you just give it to the person who's taking care of you, basically, and you vote it. The reason you have to sign your name on it is that when we count those votes, we have to ensure that you have voted only once, that you didn't vote. See, these votes are going to be counted the day after the election. So we have to ensure that you didn't vote the day of the election and by either by special ballot at your returning office or by mail, because it's the same ballot when you want to vote by mail. Now, it's a little more complicated to vote by mail because you have to apply for it. You have to go on elections.ca. There's a space there that says vote by mail. You click on it. It gives you all the steps that you have to take. You fill out an application. You have to prove your identity, just like you would at a regular polling station, just like you would at your returning office if you're voting there by special ballot. You have to prove your name and your address. So you have to have a government document that proves that. In Ontario, for example, a driver's license would have that, would have your name and would have your address. So that would be perfect. If you're applying to vote by mail, you would have to attach that to your application. You can scan it, you can take a picture with your telephone, whatever, and you attach it to your application, you send it in, boom, you get a kit in the mail. In the kit, you will have the special instructions on how to do it, for one thing, and then that little envelope and the special ballot. You do the same thing as you would at the returning office. You put it in the little envelope, in the bigger envelope, you sign the envelope, and that one is already self-addressed to an Elections Canada office. So all you have to do basically is run to your nearest mailbox and put it in. But remember,
and it's postage paid as well. You don't have to worry about getting a stamp on it.
Absolutely, it's postage paid. But a couple of things to remember: if you apply to vote by mail and we send you a kit, you cannot change your mind. You cannot vote in any other way, because we will have struck you from the voters list, because we think you're going to be voting by mail. We sent you the kit. We sent you a ballot. You already have a ballot, and you only get one ballot in Canada to vote. So that is something to remember. And the other thing too is to remember the deadline. You cannot apply after the 14th of September. And that only gives you like 6 days, because it has to be into an Election Canada office by the end of voting day on the 20th. So if you apply on the 14th, it may be tight. So there's another thing you can do. If you think for example, it's the 18th and you haven't mailed your ballot back, you can always, on the day of the election, and only on the day of the election, not at advance polls, on the day of the election, you can take that ballot and bring it to your polling station. Now, remember, your polling stations this year may be different. So take a good look at your voter information card, because you may be voting somewhere where you've never voted before, because of the pandemic. Obviously, we've had to change a lot of these places because, for example, some schools were not available to us, and other places landlords would not want to have throngs of people coming to vote, and because of the pandemic. So some of the polling locations may have changed, and it's very important for people to look at the voter information card this year.
The other thing too is can you drop your special ballot at the returning office if you don't mail it, or you forget about mailing it? Can it go instead of the polling station, but can it go to the returning office directly?
It can until the 14th.
Until the 14th, okay.
After the 14th, you will have to wait until election day. Well, you will have to either mail it or wait on election day and bring it to your polling station, the one that's on your voter information card.
But not the Elections Canada office.
That's right.
Okay, that's important to remember. It's those little subtleties, because I have worked an election in the past at the advance poll, and some of these subtleties take a little bit of explaining, but it's always worth finding out how things work. It was really interesting in my experience. The identification issues did cause some people some concern, but I did find that Elections Canada staff, the permanent staff, have the attitude of, our goal is to allow you to vote. If you're qualified, right, we will do our best to allow you to vote. And I know that the returning officer who has changed, but the former returning officer in this riding was very, very enthusiastic and helped us immensely to allow people to vote.
That's right. And if you have the proper identification papers, obviously, it's easy. I mean, you walk in there, and we've all done it. Well, those our age anyways. We've all done it before. And you walk in there, you've got your driver's license or whatever papers you need. For example, if you don't have a driver's license, you can have two pieces of ID. For example, you can have your health card. Your health card has your picture and your name, but it doesn't have your address. So you can bring another piece of paper that would ascertain your address. For example, an electrical bill. There's a fair chance you're not paying the electrical bill of anyone else. So you can bring that. It would have your address on it. That's the bill you're paying. And therefore, that would count, and that would be perfect. There's also other means. People sometimes are in different circumstances. I was talking to an elector the other day who just moved and just applied to have on the Ontario site, to have her driver's license and her health card and all that changed. She won't get that in time. So there's always ways where you can go in there and you can swear an oath, and particularly in smaller towns, sometimes, somebody will know you there, and people can vouch for you and that kind of thing. So yes, you're right. The aim of Elections Canada is to allow people to vote, not to stop them from voting.
And I should add that in my own experience, Elections Canada are enthusiastic about allowing us to vote, to the point we were in the polls. I was an advance poll that I was responsible for, or supervising. We were swamped. We had dozens of people lined up to vote, and one of the senior election staff people for this district showed up at the poll, and I looked at her, and she's first words out of her mouth were, "Okay, how can I help?" And you put her to work.
That's right.
And that's the kind of can-do attitude that Elections Canada has.
That's right. That is what most of the people that we hire are very committed to doing this. Some of them have been doing it for years and years and years. And by the way, it'd be important for your listeners to know that we're still looking for people to work, particularly on election day. And they need to know also that it's a paying gig. It's worth doing. Particularly this year where we've upped our game a little bit, we're paying more, plus we're paying overtime because those are long days. I mean, on election day, you'll be working probably 12 hours, maybe 14, depending on how it goes in the poll and the counting and all that. So you walk in there, you walk out of there, you'll receive a nice little paycheck. But what's also important is that you will have learned a lot about the election, as you have, as you mentioned. The other thing that's important here is if people are interested in doing that, people 16 years old can work at a poll, which is really interesting because it's a great way, for the teenagers to make a few bucks. That's always interesting, but it's also a very good way to learn about the electoral process, about how an election works, and also meet people that have an interest in the election. They're all going to be your colleague for a day or two, so that's really also very interesting. And people can apply online at elections.ca, or they can phone their own returning office. Again, they can find where their local Election Canada office is by going on our website, putting in their postal code, and boom, where's my election office? And it tells you right there, the name, the phone number, everything.
And I have to say that a lot of the people who work in the elections have worked many elections. I happen to have a cousin who lives out in BC, and she was excited about this election, not because it was a political thing, it's she likes to work elections. And
it's a good thing. It's a good thing that some people like to do that. In the last election, Elections Canada hired 230,000 people. That is a lot of people. That is, the bigger population in some electoral districts in Canada. But they were needed, and they did a great job. And we had a fairly high turnout. I forget, it was over, I believe it was 67%. Don't quote me on that one. But it was around that, which was a very high number in today's world, in most democracies where numbers have plummeted over the years. And we were very happy to have these people. But this year, we may need a bit more simply because of COVID again. Some of the rules about social distancing and about things like that in the polling stations will mean that we will need more people.
Now, you and I are both experienced voters. We've voted in many previous elections, but there's also a cohort of people who are voting for the first time. They might be new citizens. They might be people who have just turned 18. They might be, for whatever the reason. What advice would you have for new voters who are voting for the first time?
Well, if they're 18, they're the web generation for sure. I'd say go on our website and learn all about different things, and there are some things that you need to know, like where you're going to vote and all that, whether you're on the registry, all that sort of thing. Because we have links with provincial civic information authorities, they give us, we know when people are going to turn 18. And a lot of people in Canada have received letters this year because they've turned 18. And we've mentioned to them that you're now on our registry and you can vote. So that is really important. Making sure that verifying our registry to make sure that you're registered. And then knowing the things that we talked about, the things that you need to bring to the polling station, which is basically something that'll prove your name and your address. You don't need to bring your voter information card, by the way. It's not recognized as an identification piece of paper, but it does expedite things when you get there and you show it to the person who's taking care of you at the election desk, because it already has your poll on it, and it has all the information, your address and everything. Again, you're going to still have to show your driver's license or whatever you're showing. But the voter information card doesn't hurt to bring, but it doesn't count as identification.
What about people whose maternal language is neither English nor French? If they need someone to help them to translate, are they permitted to have someone come with them?
We try not to go and vote in the back for sure. Once you're behind the shield, where you actually mark your ballot, nobody can be there with you. But we definitely try to get people that speak different languages, French and English, obviously, being a bilingual country. But at the same time, in certain constituencies, it's much, much better to speak an East Asian language or to speak Chinese and so we endeavor, we know most of the returning officers, they know their area, and they know in this particular polling station, everybody is going to be of a certain descent, and then they will try to have in that polling station people who can speak the language. But you can also bring someone who can help you navigate the beginning of the process, but not at the end. At the end, you're alone behind a shield, some kind of where people can't see you, and you mark your ballot on your own.
Well, Rejean, if we were to very quickly, we've got about 2 minutes left, if there was one bit of advice that you would give to prospective electors in this election, what would it be?
Vote early. No, really, particularly on advanced polling this year is starting on the 10th to the 14th. So that's 4 days. So you have a lot of opportunity to go and vote advanced poll. And that way, if anything were to happen for you or something you need to go away or whatever, you've done your job. And I'd say vote early. And the old saying, vote early, vote often. No, you only vote once in Canada.
Yes, there are other countries where it's vote early, vote often, but not in this country. Never has been, I guess. Yeah.
That's right.
Now, just very quickly, results will come out over a period of time this year, I understand. And you mentioned it because the special ballots are not counted until the day after.
Right.
We may not know the actual result until afterwards.
That's right. Most of the results, when we post results in any election on election night, they are called preliminary results, even in a regular election and when there's not a lot of mail-in ballots. And those are usually confirmed within days after the election. But they're usually pretty right on, This time, depending on how many of these mail-in ballots, that could change. But, if some candidate wins by, 2,000 votes in a riding, and only 1,000 people have voted by mail in that riding, not going to change a lot.
Rejean, we're just about out of time. I want to thank you for your conversation and helping us to vote. Best wishes in all that you do in the next little while. You're going to be very, very busy. Thank you. And friends, thank you for being a part of Politically Speaking. I'm David Shearman. We'll talk again.
Thank you.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details. Call the Rogers TV viewer response line. Email us or connect with us on social media.
Are you the type who would keep going or stop? It's not easy to stop when you have an addiction. Legalizing cannabis won't stop addiction. It trivializes its consumption. Let's be vigilant. If you need help, visit portage.ca.
Alexander the Great!
I'm going to stay champion for a long time.
Brian Ortega!
Volkanovski, you ready or not? I'm coming.
Valentina Shevchenko.